Mr. Ali was a man whose name echoed across the fashion industry in Nigeria. His company, Ali Couture, had become a household name, not only in Abuja, where the head office stood majestically, but also in Lagos, Port Harcourt, Kano, and beyond the shores of the country. The tall glass building that bore his company's logo glittered in the sun along one of Abuja's busiest streets. Every day, young men and women walked into that building with their heads held high, proud to work for a company that represented class, wealth, and excellence. For more than 20 years, Mr. Ali had built the business with his own sweat and vision. He had been born into an ordinary family in Kaduna, and in his youth, he knew hunger and lack. He had once hawked slippers on the roadside, calling out to uninterested pedestrians until dusk. But he was a dreamer, and his hands were skilled. By the time he was in his 20s, he had begun making clothes in a small wooden shop. Customers came because his stitches were neat, and his designs had a touch of boldness that set them apart. Over the years, that small wooden shop grew into a factory, then a showroom, and finally into a conglomerate that shook the Nigerian fashion world. Politicians wore his suits. Celebrities were proud to display his designs. He became a symbol of Nigerian creativity. Yet, for all his success, Mr. Ali remained a man of deep thought. He was a widower, and with no children of his own, he often wondered what would become of his empire when his body grew too weak to keep the wheel turning. He was now in his early 60s, and although age had not bent his tall frame, he felt the weight of time on his shoulders. He had plans to relocate abroad, where he owned properties in London and Dubai. The thought of leaving his company behind troubled him, not because he feared financial loss, but because he wanted the business to remain in good hands, hands that not only knew how to manage money, but also how to manage people with compassion. Mr. Ali believed strongly that kindness was a currency more powerful than profit. He had seen people with sharp minds, but cold hearts destroy empires. He knew that efficiency without humanity turned leaders into tyrants. And so, while he had competent managers and staff who sang his praises daily, he was not convinced that any of them possessed the kind of heart he wanted to leave his legacy with. Each morning when he stepped into his company building, his staff rose with respect. His drivers opened the doors, his assistants rushed with files, and his designers bowed with gratitude. Everyone wanted to be on his good side. They spoke softly around him, they obeyed his instructions swiftly, and they called him the boss with a golden heart. But deep in his soul, Mr. Ali feared that much of what he saw was pretense. He worried that the smiles were painted, and the respect was only because of his position and wealth. At night, in his luxurious mansion in Maitama, Mr. Ali would sit by the balcony, staring at the stars. He often asked himself, who among them would still care for me if I had nothing? Who among them would still value humanity over profit? He wanted someone who could lead not just with intelligence, but with genuine compassion. For him, kindness was the true test of greatness. As the weeks rolled into months, Mr. Ali became restless. His plan to travel abroad was pressing. Investors were waiting, and his doctors had advised him to reduce stress. Yet, he could not hand over his company until he found someone worthy. The dilemma grew heavier on his heart. One evening, while sipping tea alone, he whispered to himself, I will find out who they truly are, not by what they say before me as their boss, but by how they act when they believe I am nothing. That thought became the seed of a test that would change everything. The staff of Ali Couture were as diverse as the city of Abuja itself. They came from different tribes, different religions, and different family backgrounds, yet they all shared one thing in common: pride in being part of Mr. Ali's empire. Every morning, the office buzzed with life like a hive of bees, each person playing their role in the success of the company. There was Musa, the head of logistics, a man known for his strictness. His eyes were sharp, and his voice often carried through the building when he barked instructions. He had been with the company for more than 10 years, rising from an ordinary clerk to the man who oversaw the movement of fabrics, machines, and finished designs. To many, Musa was the very picture of loyalty. Then there was Amaka, the creative designer, whose sketches had turned ordinary fabric into masterpieces that caught the eyes of politicians' wives and Nollywood actresses. She was young, brilliant and outspoken, often walking with confidence that made the junior staff admire and fear her at the same time. Amaka had joined Ali Couture after graduating from a top fashion school in Lagos, and she always referred to Mr. Ali as my mentor. Fatima, the accountant, was another pillar. Slim, reserved, and disciplined, she kept the company's finances spotless. She was the kind who rarely smiled, but her colleagues respected her for her accuracy and efficiency. Some whispered that she was the boss's favorite, though in truth, Mr. Ali had no favorite. Among the junior staff, there was Helen, a quiet young woman who worked in customer service. She had joined only 2 years earlier after finishing her NYSC. Many hardly noticed her in the midst of the vibrant, fashion-forward crowd. She was not the type who pushed herself forward, and though she was diligent with her duties, she lived a simple, almost invisible life within the company. Few knew about her struggles at home, the rising rent, the landlord's constant threats, and her mother's failing health. But Helen carried her burdens quietly, with a smile that seemed to hide her storms. Mr. Ali often watched them all, unseen behind his tinted office glass or while walking silently through the showroom. He studied the way they interacted with one another, how they treated customers, and how they responded to challenges. Outwardly, everything seemed perfect. His staff respected him deeply, and they treated one another with professional courtesy. But he knew better than to trust appearances. He decided to test them in subtle ways. One Monday morning, he walked into the office with an announcement. "I have decided that our company will sponsor a charity drive for orphan children," he said during the staff meeting. "I want everyone to contribute from their salaries, no matter how small, and the company will double whatever you give." There was applause around the boardroom. The staff clapped eagerly, nodding in agreement. Within minutes, Musa pledged a handsome amount. Amaka promised to design free clothes for the children, and Fatima assured the boss that the finance department would coordinate everything with transparency. Even the junior staff, including Helen, signed up with enthusiasm, pledging what little they could. A week later, Mr. Ali organized another test. He sent his secretary to inform the staff that a distant relative of his had fallen into hardship and needed urgent help. Once again, the staff rallied, contributing money, food, and even clothes. Their generosity impressed him, but it still left a nagging question in his heart. Were they doing all this because they truly cared, or because they wanted to be in as good books as their employer? Over the following weeks, Mr. Ali set up different charitable tasks. He asked some to visit an old people's home with supplies, others to donate blood at the hospital, and some to sponsor underprivileged students. To his delight, they all carried out the assignments without complaint. His company seemed full of kind-hearted people. But when he sat alone in his office after the reports came in, he felt no peace. The thought haunted him like a shadow. Would they have done all this if they did not know it was from me? If a stranger in need had asked for help, would they have given it so freely? The doubt grew stronger with each passing day. It became clear to him that the only way to uncover the truth was to strip himself of his identity. He needed to see how his staff treated someone they believed had nothing to offer them. No money, no power, no recognition. And so, as the city of Abuja roared outside with its noise of cars, hawkers, and hurried footsteps, Mr. Ali's heart settled on a dangerous but necessary plan. He would become the very thing society overlooked every day. He would become a beggar. Mr. Ali had always believed that human nature revealed itself most clearly when no reward was attached. A man who gave only when he expected applause was not truly generous. His kindness was a performance, not a reflection of the heart. This belief guided him as he continued to watch his staff. The company's charity drive had been a success. Photographs of staff handing out clothes to orphans filled the company's social media pages. Customers applauded Ali Couture not only for its fashion, but also for its humanity. The board members were proud, and the staff carried themselves with more confidence, as though their good works had elevated their status in society. But in the quiet of his office, Mr. Ali felt a hollowness. He had not doubted that his staff could contribute when their boss was the one asking. What troubled him was whether they would show the same kindness without his name attached. He needed more than people who were efficient, intelligent, or skilled. He needed someone who carried goodness as naturally as breathing. To probe further, he designed private tests. One morning, he sent his driver, dressed in ordinary clothes, to approach the staff at different times. The driver posed as a stranger needing help for transport back home. Musa, the head of logistics, gave him money with a smile, but the driver noticed how Musa kept glancing around to see if anyone was watching. Amaka, the designer, also gave, though she made sure to mention loudly that she had helped, as if she wanted the story to reach the boss's ears. Helen, however, behaved differently. When the driver approached her during her lunch break, she had only a small portion of rice and stew in a plastic container. She did not have much money to spare that day, but she quietly handed him half of her meal and said nothing to anyone. There was no audience, no applause, no cameras, just an act of quiet kindness. The driver returned and reported everything to Mr. Ali. The boss sat back in his chair, stroking his graying beard thoughtfully. For the first time, he felt a flicker of hope. Yet he was not ready to conclude. Days later, he tried again. This time, he told the staff that a local school needed volunteers to paint its classrooms. He asked who would be willing to give up their Saturday. Nearly everyone raised their hands. The following weekend, the staff trooped to the school in branded company shirts. They painted walls, posed for photographs, and uploaded their good deeds online. Again, Mr. Ali saw efficiency, but he still smelled performance. He began to feel trapped in a dilemma. Outwardly, his staff looked perfect, dutiful, charitable, even selfless. But deep down, he could not shake off the fear that they were acting, that their kindness lived only in the shadow of his wealth and authority. The more he thought about it, the more restless he became. One evening, as he drove through the city alone, he slowed at a junction where beggars crowded the roadside. Children with dusty faces tapped on car windows, women stretched out weary hands, and old men sat with bowls at their feet. The sight stirred memories of his own childhood, when he too had known the sharp sting of hunger and the humiliation of asking for help. A wild idea took root in his mind. He whispered to himself, "If I want to know the truth, I must become like one of them. I must strip myself of every symbol of wealth and see who among my staff will still show kindness." That night, sleep eluded him. He paced the length of his mansion, his heart beating fast at the thought of what he was about to do. It was risky, even dangerous. What if his disguise failed? What if the world mocked him? What if his staff treated him harshly? Still, he felt a fire inside him. This was the only way. By dawn, the plan was clear in his heart. He would disguise himself as a poor, dirty beggar and sit by the gate of his own company. No one would know it was him. From there, he would watch and wait. The test that would decide the future of Ali Couture had begun. The decision to disguise himself weighed heavily on Mr. Ali's heart. He was not an ordinary man anymore. He was a CEO known across Nigeria, a figure of influence in the fashion world, a name that appeared in magazines and television interviews. To strip himself of all that and sit as a beggar in front of his own company was a risk that could either reveal the truth or ruin his dignity. For several nights, he wrestled with the thought. He paced his wide, marbled living room in Maytalma, listening to the ticking of the golden wall clock. He imagined the faces of his staff if they ever discovered what he had done. Some would call him wise, others might call him foolish. Investors might question his sanity. But every time he thought of abandoning the plan, the image of those beggars by the roadside returned to his mind. He remembered the hunger of his youth, the rejection of strangers, the way he once sat helpless with nothing but a bowl in his hand. "This is the only way," he whispered to himself. "This is the only way to see who truly has a heart." He began to plan carefully. He could not go to the market himself to buy old clothes, for someone might recognize him. Instead, he called one of his most trusted domestic staff, a housekeeper who had been with him for years, and asked for a favor without revealing the full purpose. He instructed her to find tattered clothes, worn-out shoes, and a cap that could shade his face. The woman obeyed, thinking perhaps he needed them for one of the company's charity dramas. When the items arrived, Mr. Ali looked at them for a long time. The clothes were dirty and torn in places, The shoes had cracked soles, and the cap was old enough to hide his features. He touched them with trembling fingers. He could not remember the last time he had worn anything so poor. His wardrobe was filled with designer suits and imported shoes, yet here before him lay the garments of obscurity. The night before his test, he stood before a mirror in his bedroom. He put on the old shirt, the trousers with holes at the knees, and the dusty shoes. He smeared charcoal across his face, rubbed dust into his hair, and bent his shoulders slightly to mimic the weariness of the homeless. When he looked at his reflection, even he struggled to recognize himself. The powerful CEO had vanished. In his place stood a man society would ignore, a man people would cross the road to avoid. His heart pounded. Will they look at me and see only dirt? He wondered. Or will someone look beyond the rags and see a human being? By morning, the city was already awake. The streets of Abuja roared with honking cars, okadas weaving dangerously, and traders calling out their wares. Mr. Ali stepped out of his mansion dressed in his disguise. For the first time in decades, he walked without his driver, without his bodyguards, without the aura of wealth. He boarded a commercial taxi, and the driver did not even glance twice at him. No one knew that the man sitting quietly at the back was the owner of one of the biggest companies in the country. When the taxi dropped him near the company's gate, Mr. Ali walked slowly to a corner, away from the main road. He sat on the bare ground, bent his head, and stretched out his hand like a beggar. He kept his voice low, muttering softly, "Please help, please help." Inside his chest, his heart beat faster than it ever had in a boardroom meeting. This was no longer about business strategy or fashion shows. This was about truth. Would his staff, who smiled and bowed before him daily, recognize the value of a poor man? Or would they pass him by as though he were invisible? That morning marked the beginning of the greatest test in the history of Ali Couture. The morning sun cast its golden light over the tall glass building of Ali Couture. The company's name glittered proudly on the wall, catching the attention of passers-by. Cars rolled into the compound, security men saluted, and staff in fine clothes hurried through the gates with files, handbags, and designer shoes. The usual rhythm of business life was in motion. But just outside the gate, on a dusty patch of ground, sat a figure no one recognized. His shirt was torn at the collar, his trousers bore stains of mud, and his shoes were so worn they barely clung to his feet. A faded cap hid most of his face, and his beard looked unkempt. His shoulders slumped as if under the weight of years of suffering. He stretched out a hand, palm open, while his voice trembled with low pleas. It was Mr. Ali, but not as anyone knew him. The wealthy CEO, who once commanded rooms with his presence, was now a shadow of himself, hidden under the mask of poverty. He sat quietly, forcing his breathing to stay calm, though inside his chest his heart thudded with nervous excitement. Every sound, every footstep that approached filled him with suspense. The first staff member to walk past was Musa, the head of logistics. Dressed smartly in a starched white shirt, Musa carried a file tucked under his arm. His phone pressed to his ear, his voice boomed as he spoke about deliveries and shipments. He spotted the beggar by the gate and frowned. Security should drive these people away, he muttered, adjusting his collar. Without slowing his pace, he walked past, his polished shoes clicking on the pavement. Mr. Ali, watching under his cap, felt his heart sink. Minutes later, Amaka, the creative designer, arrived. She wore a flowing gown of her own design, bold and elegant, with earrings that sparkled in the sunlight. She noticed the beggar immediately. Her lips twisted slightly as she whispered, "These beggars spoil the beauty of everywhere." She walked past, holding her bag tightly, not sparing him a glance. One after another, staff members came. Some wrinkled their noses, others shook their heads in irritation. A few muttered about how the government should remove beggars from the city. None stopped. None asked if he had eaten. None dropped even a coin into his open palm. As he sat there, ignored and invisible, Mr. Ali's mind churned. He thought of the countless times these very staff members had stood in his office, smiling, bowing, praising him as the best boss in the world. Yet here he was, disguised as a poor man, and none of that supposed kindness remained. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, burning his skin. His back ached from sitting on the hard ground. Hunger gnawed at his stomach, though he had eaten a fine breakfast earlier that morning. He began to taste the reality of those who lived this life every day, not for an experiment, but because it was all they knew. Just when he was beginning to despair, a gentle voice broke the monotony. "Excuse me, sir, are you all right?" He lifted his head slightly. Standing before him was Helen, the quiet young woman from customer service. She was not dressed as richly as the others. Her clothes were simple but neat, and her handbag looked worn from use. Her eyes, however, carried something none of the others had shown: genuine concern. Helen knelt slightly, trying to meet his eyes beneath the cap. "Have you eaten today?" she asked softly. Mr. Ali's throat tightened. He nodded weakly, playing his role. She looked at him carefully, then opened her handbag. Inside was a small pack of food, jollof rice and fried plantain she had brought for lunch. Without hesitation, she pulled it out and pressed it into his hands. "Please eat," she said. "I'll manage somehow. You look like you need this more than I do." Tears pricked Mr. Ali's eyes, though he kept his face hidden. Her words pierced him deeper than any act of charity he had witnessed. She was struggling with her own burdens. He knew her story, her unpaid rent, her landlord's threats, yet she gave from her little without hesitation. As she turned to leave, she paused, reached into her purse, and pulled out a crumpled 500 naira note. She pressed it into his palm and whispered, "It's not much, but please, use it to get some water. God will help you." Then she smiled faintly and walked into the company gate. Mr. Ali sat frozen, his heart pounding with a mixture of awe and emotion. For hours, dozens had walked past him, pretending he was not there. But this one young woman, burdened with her own troubles, had chosen kindness. He knew, in that moment, that the future of Ali Couture had just been decided. The sun had already climbed high above Abuja, spreading its heat across the city. The gate of Ali Couture was alive with movement, security men saluting, staff rushing in and out, cars honking as they maneuvered for space. Yet on the dusty corner just outside, Mr. Ali remained seated in his disguise, his body bent, his palms stretched out in silent appeal. By mid-morning, he had seen enough to confirm what he had long suspected. His staff, those who filled his office with praises, those who clapped loudly during meetings, those who pledged money for every charity drive, most of them had walked past him without a trace of kindness. Some of them had even sneered. One young man in the design department had muttered, "These beggars are everywhere. They should go and work instead of disturbing us." Another had covered his nose dramatically, as if the mere presence of poverty was an offense. Mr. Ali's heart ached as he watched. He thought of the long nights he had stayed awake, planning staff welfare, increasing salaries, paying for medical bills, even sponsoring some for further studies. Yet when faced with what they thought was an ordinary beggar, their hearts turned cold. It was a painful truth that kindness done for applause was not kindness at all. But then he remembered Helen. Her face returned to his mind, soft with concern, her voice trembling with sincerity as she pressed food and money into his hands. He clutched the crumpled note she had given him, holding it tightly as though it were a priceless treasure. That single act of kindness shone brighter than all the grand gestures the others had performed under his instructions. He sat for a while longer, watching, testing. By noon, most of the staff had gone in and out, and he had seen no other act of mercy. Only Helen had stopped. Only Helen had cared. As the sun dipped slightly, he rose to his feet slowly, stretching his stiff back. The dust clung to his trousers, and his face itched from the charcoal he had rubbed into his skin. For a moment, he stood there in silence, staring at the building he had built with his life's work. Then he whispered to himself, "Now I know the truth. Now I know who carries the heart I have been searching for." He walked away quietly, avoiding the curious glances of passers-by. In his heart, he was already planning how the revelation would unfold. His staff had been tested, and the judgment day had come. That evening, after bathing and changing into his usual sharp suit, He sat at his study desk, replaying the day's events in his mind. His heart felt both heavy and light. Heavy because of the coldness he had witnessed, light because a flicker of hope remained in Helen. He drafted a note to his board of directors, requesting a full staff meeting the next morning. His decision had been made. The true successor of Ali Couture was not the loudest, not the most talented, not the most celebrated, but the one whose heart had shone in a moment of quiet, unrecognized kindness. Tomorrow, the truth would shake the company. Helen was one of those people life had pressed hard, yet she carried her burdens with quiet dignity. At 27, she was still trying to find her footing in a city that showed little mercy to the poor. Abuja was a land of shining buildings and flashing wealth, but beneath its glitter lay countless struggles, and Helen knew that truth more than most. She had grown up in a modest home in Jos, where her mother worked as a petty trader and her father, a mason, died when she was only 13. The death had thrown the family into hardship, forcing Helen to combine school with hawking bread and groundnuts just to help her mother keep the household afloat. Through sheer determination, she managed to complete her studies, gain admission to a university, and graduate. When her NYSC posting brought her to Abuja, she had hoped life would finally turn around. She dreamed of finding a stable job, sending money home to her mother, and maybe one day renting a small but decent apartment for herself. But reality was harsher than her dreams. Rent was high, salaries were low, and every day came with its own mountain of bills. By the time she secured a junior role in the customer service unit of Ali Couture, she was already worn thin. The salary, though better than what many of her mates earned, was still barely enough to cover her rent, feeding, and the small medical expenses of her sick mother back in Jos month after month. She juggled the figures, cutting corners, living with only the basics. Her landlord had grown impatient. For 2 months she had been unable to pay, and he had started threatening eviction. Sometimes, when she returned from work late at night, she would find her door padlocked in anger, and she would have to beg until morning before being allowed back in. Her heart was weary, yet she never let her colleagues see the storm raging inside her. At work, she smiled, answered customer calls, and performed her duties faithfully. That morning, as she left home for the office, she carried only a small pack of food, jollof rice and fried plantain. It was her lunch, but she also knew it might be her dinner, if she could not stretch her money further. In her purse lay a crumpled 500 naira note, the last cash she had until salary was paid. When she saw the beggar sitting outside the company gate, something tugged at her heart. She had walked past many beggars in Abuja before, sometimes giving, sometimes too broke to spare anything. But this man's eyes caught her attention. Beneath the dust on his face, there was a weariness, a silent cry that pierced her. She did not think of the risk. She did not think of herself. She simply reached into her bag, took the food meant for her, and placed it in his hands. Hunger was familiar to her, and she could not bear to watch another soul sit helpless. The week passed slowly, with Mr. Ali continuing his test in disguise. Each day, he sat quietly near the entrance of his company, wearing his ragged clothes, his face hidden behind the dirt and grime of his disguise. He watched as the staff came and went. Most avoided him completely. Some muttered insults under their breath. A few looked at him with pity, but none offered help. None except Helen. Her gesture lingered in his mind like a candle flame burning steadily in the dark. He could not forget how she had placed her only food in his hands, how she had given him her last money without hesitation, and how she had spoken to him gently, like he was human and not trash. It wasn't only charity, it was compassion. By Friday morning, he had made his decision. That day, he returned to the office dressed in his usual elegant suit, charcoal gray with a silk tie, polished shoes gleaming under the bright lights of the conference hall. The staff gathered for their routine weekly briefing, unaware of what was about to unfold. Excitement buzzed in the air, because the CEO rarely called for such a meeting unless something big was at stake. The employees filled the large hall, whispering among themselves, their faces expectant. Helen sat quietly at the back, still lost in her worries about her unpaid rent, not knowing she was the very center of the coming storm. When Mr. Ali entered, the hall went silent. He walked with his usual calm authority, but there was an intensity in his eyes that none could miss. He stood at the podium, looked at them for a long while, and then smiled faintly. "My dear staff," he began, his voice steady, "for many years I have worked with you. Together, we built this company into one of the most respected fashion brands in Nigeria. I am proud of each and every one of you. But as you all know, I am preparing to relocate abroad. It means that soon, I must hand this company over to someone who will lead it with integrity." Murmurs ran through the hall. Some smiled confidently. Others exchanged knowing glances. Many had secretly hoped to be the chosen one. Mr. Ali raised a hand, and the hall fell quiet again. "In the past month, I have tested you. Not with numbers, not with fashion designs, not with client reports, but with humanity. I wanted to know not only who is efficient, but who has a heart for people." The staff looked confused. Then he paused, his voice dropping lower. "Perhaps some of you noticed a beggar sitting at the gate this past week." Gasps spread across the hall. Almost everyone remembered the dirty man by the entrance, the one they avoided, ignored, or mocked. Mr. Ali removed his glasses, his gaze sharp. "That beggar was me." The hall erupted with shock. Mouths dropped open. A few staff exchanged horrified glances, recalling the insults they had muttered. Others covered their faces in shame. Helen's heart skipped, her hands trembling as she struggled to process the words. "Yes," Mr. Ali continued, "I sat there in rags, waiting to see who among you would show kindness. Many of you turned away. Some even laughed. But only one of you stopped, spoke gently, gave me food, and offered her last money." His eyes swept across the hall until they landed on Helen. She froze as his words fell like thunder. That person was Helen. The hall exploded again, this time with whispers, disbelief, and some hidden envy. Heads turned toward her, eyes wide with shock. Helen sat still, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear herself breathe. Mr. Ali smiled, his voice warm but firm. "Kindness is not weakness. It is strength. Efficiency can be taught, but compassion is rare. And so I have made my decision. From today, Helen will begin her journey as the new head of this company. She will be trained, mentored, and guided to lead Ali Couture into the future." Silence followed, thick and heavy. Some clapped hesitantly, others forced smiles, while a few looked away, battling bitterness. But Helen? She sat speechless, tears welling in her eyes. She had come that morning worried about eviction. She would leave that evening as the chosen heir to one of the biggest fashion companies in the country. Her kindness had changed everything. The conference hall still buzzed like a disturbed hive. Whispers darted from one corner to another, glances shot like arrows, and emotions hung heavy in the air. Some faces glowed with relief that they had not been exposed as unkind. Others stiffened with envy, their eyes narrowing toward Helen. Helen herself sat frozen, her mind blank. She could hear her name repeated again and again, some in admiration, others in disbelief. She pressed her palms against her lap to steady her trembling. Was this real? Just days ago, she had stood outside the gate, worried about eviction, and given her last money to a stranger. Now, that act had placed her in the center of everything. Mr. Ali raised his hand again, and silence gradually returned. His voice carried a mix of authority and gentleness. "Let me be clear," he said, his eyes scanning the room. "This is not just about giving food or money. It is about the heart behind it." Helen gave not because she had plenty, she gave because she cared. And that is what true leadership requires. A murmur of agreement rippled through a few staff, but many shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One bold voice came from the middle row. It was Beezy, one of the senior designers. "But sir," she said cautiously, "Helen is young. She has no managerial experience. With all due respect, don't you think this decision is risky?" The hall grew tense. All eyes turned back to Mr. Ali. He smiled faintly, as though he had expected the question. "Beezy, you are right," he replied calmly. "She does not yet have managerial experience. That is why I said she will be mentored. Skills can be trained, systems can be taught. But integrity and compassion? Those cannot be manufactured. They are the foundation upon which everything else must rest." Beezy sank back into her chair, cheeks flushed. Helen, overwhelmed, slowly rose to her feet. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "Sir, I don't know what to say. I only did what I thought was right. I never imagined it would lead to something like this." Mr. Ali's eyes softened. "That is exactly why you were chosen, Helen. You gave without expectation. You acted when no one was watching. That is the kind of leader I want for this company." Applause broke out, soft at first, then stronger. A few staff clapped reluctantly, while others joined in with genuine admiration. The sound echoed in Helen's ears, making her heart race. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she lowered herself back into her seat. After the meeting ended, small groups of employees gathered in the corridors, discussing the shocking announcement. Some shook their heads, muttering that it was unfair. Others smiled quietly, saying Helen deserved it. A handful avoided her altogether, their faces tight with jealousy. Helen herself slipped away quietly to the restroom. She leaned against the tiled wall, pressing her hands to her chest. She whispered to herself, "God, is this really me?" In that moment, she remembered her mother back in Joss, her landlord's threats, the long nights of hunger, and the silent prayers she had whispered only days before. She had felt forgotten by life, invisible in the crowd. But today, she realized something powerful. Kindness had found her, lifted her, and placed her where she never imagined.